Season's Bleatings once again. We've been doing top 10s this month, and I saved this one for last because I think that this is the one that most people are the more interested in. The last until my overall wrap-up anyway. But we're doing my top 10 horror novels of the year, so like with everything else, this isn't necessarily all novels that were published this year, although I think most of them were, but they're novels I read for the first time this year. And this is just my opinion, of course. I'd love to know what your favourite novels are, but let's just get right into it from number 10 to number 1. Coming in at number 10, oh, I read 58 novels this year, just for some context, so this is my top 10 out of 58. And coming in at number 10 is The Glut by Matthew Cash from Birdiezo Books. I feel sometimes like I have to justify this a little bit. This is the cover. You could probably tell it's going to be quite gross. I wouldn't call this extreme horror, although it does have some elements with, there's some extremely detailed extreme depictions of a ritual that is absolutely disgusting, and even I'm a extreme horror wimp, but I did have to skip ahead a couple of paragraphs for the ritual because I just couldn't anymore. But despite that, I just love this book. I had such a good time with it. It's about a guy who's really struggling with his weight, and he meets somebody else who also was obese a very short time ago, and now he's really fit and healthy. So our protagonist jumps right on board with the same technique that this guy used, only to find that there were quite outrageous consequences to get the results that he wanted. And it's so on the surface, it's a really fun horror story. The concept is very, very unique. I haven't seen anything like this anyway. And beneath that, there's quite a sympathetic commentary on weight and body issue and health struggles. People who've never struggled with being overweight, I think some people haven't got much patience for it because the mindset is like, oh, well, it's self-inflicted and all you have to do is just stop eating and eat healthier and work out more and everything. And yes, that is what you have to do to be healthy. But if you're already in a bad pattern with food, or if you get into a bad pattern with food, there is an extremely strong mental component, and we are kind of governed by our brains. And there's a lot going on mentally with your diet, your health, and your attitude towards yourself, and exercise, and all of that stuff. And it delves quite a bit into that with our protagonist. So I gotta say, I didn't really like the protagonist, honestly, but a lot of what he was going through was very relatable, and I understood why he was the way he was, for even the bits of his personality I didn't like. But yeah, great horror story, and quite an in-depth look at this area of human life. Really gross. Number 9, I don't have my physical copy because my friend Stephen was supposed to bring my physical copy from the USA with him to FantasyCon this year, and he forgot it. It's almost like it wasn't the most important top of his list priority item to bring. Strange. But it's an exploration of existential indifference and a void of confidence, or Good Boy, a novel by Gavin Dillinger, which was independently published. And this story, if you're someone who enjoys stuff like John dies at the end, this might be your cup of tea. It's not as abstract as John dies at the end gets. It's way more grounded in things we know. But of course there's supernatural stuff going on, but that one never made me feel a bit like, hang on, what? It's not bizarro horror then, but it's about a guy who moves into a house without viewing the house first. He's just looked at pictures and he just signs up. And if that sounds like something no one would do, I personally know 2 guys that did that, and unlucky for them, it turned out to be a scam. There wasn't a house. But they paid over a load of money, and I still to this day can't believe they did that. But anyway, this guy moves into this house and he's having a look through, and it's, you know, it's pretty standard. There's the odd little thing that could do with a touch up, until he gets to his bedroom where he discovers the hell portal that's just there on the floor, and to deal with that he just pushes his bed over it, cover it up, and then spends the next weeks and months just shoving stuff back into the portal that's like climbing out. And along the way he acquires a dog, a little good boy dog, and then things come after the dog because apparently it's important to hell for some reason. It shouldn't have got out and it shouldn't be in the real world. And it's sort of like a comedy horror. It's really funny. The sense of humor in it was kind of like Shaun of the Dead-esque. So like the character is kind of unfortunate. This is like, the plot is just kind of happening to him, and it's the way that he responds to it all that's really funny. But it just, yeah, it was just a really good time. I had such a great time reading that book. Number 8. No one's talking about this. It's driving me nuts. This is The Corpse Road by Sean Hogan from PS Publishing. This is so good, and it was one of the last books I've read of this year. I've only read it a couple of weeks ago. This is about 2 sisters who co-own a little holiday property in Cornwall, I think, and their relationship is a little bit fraught, but out of family obligation they always, at least once a year, meet up at this little cabin they own with their partners, spend time together and things like that. And it's really realistically depicted, this relationship. Like, these sisters are very different people and they clearly have gripes with each other, but they love each other, I think. And one of them puts a lot of pressure on the other kind of doesn't stand up for herself when she should. I definitely really disliked one of them and really liked the other, and the book is written in alternating chapters of, I think, the first person. First person, and it just alternates between the sisters' perspectives, just takes turns, which was really interesting read, because I was fully on board with one sister and then you're in the mind of the other one. So I still didn't like the other one, but at least I could read her thoughts, so I understood her behaviour, but I just think she wasn't a great person. And then right at the beginning of the book, a horrible tragedy happens, and it's, you know, it's down to where your personal feelings lie about whose fault this is, if it was anybody's fault, if anyone should be feeling guilty, if anyone should be blaming anybody else. But something awful happens that results in a very unfortunate death. And then a year later, the sisters are back at this cabin dealing with the grief and the fallout. And I don't want to tell you anything about the 3rd act, but it's a slow burn. And I know people say slow burn without really knowing what that means. A slow burn applies to stories where the pacing is decent, but the story is unraveling, the action is unraveling very slowly, but there's a big payoff at the end, and there's definitely a big payoff at the end of this. I enjoy a slow burn story that doesn't let me down at the end. Slow burns that don't explode at the end aren't really slow burns, they're just slow. This is a slow burn. There are supernatural aspects, there are creepy folklorish things, sort of local urban legend is tied into this. We've got a few other characters. I loved the horror stuff. I was happy thinking I knew everything that was going to happen here and what kind of story this was. I was very surprised by something that happens, and then very surprised about what that said about the characters. And I really appreciated Sean for writing it that way. Because everybody is fallible, and very few people in the world are 100% decent people that have never thought a nasty thought in their life, if anyone. I think my favourite thing about this was the sibling element and how well it was depicted, because I was hooked. Like, even if there wasn't a horror story element to this, if this wasn't a horror novel and if it wasn't heading into horror territory, I still would have been enthralled just with the relationship and seeing what was going to happen there. It was just some of the best character work I've ever read. Number 7, Last Night of Freedom by Dan Howarth. This who published this? Northern Republic. This is so much fun. This is a real world horror story, so not like a big supernatural caper or anything, about a stag party, and for various reasons, instead of going on your typical stag parties, strip clubs and, you know, clubbing and all that, they book into a B&B in this small village, and they're just drinking in the local pub and playing pool, where they encounter a local stag party that are having their festivities at the same time, and then it essentially becomes a manhunt. So our protagonist stag party are being hunted down by the locals, and it's some sort of ritualistic tradition. And initially, I think I gave it 4 stars because I had a few gripes, but then over time I completely changed my mind about how I felt about those things, and I just love this book. It was really entertaining. Again, really great character work. We're jumping around perspectives of the whole stag party, so we get to be in the heads of all these people. It reminded me character-wise of The Ritual, with these 4 guys where they've been friends a long time, but obviously sometimes as you grow up, the people that you love aren't like growing with you or growing in the same way, so you're naturally getting a bit divided, and there's a lot of that here. So there's some other aspects of The Ritual actually in this, but yeah, it's just a really fun time. I would love to see a prequel novel. I never say that. Usually when I read a really good novel, I hope the author will just leave it alone. It's like really good horror films for me. Like, I don't want sequels, I just want it left alone so that the whole property is perfect in my mind. But I would love a prequel to this that maybe leans a little bit more into what the locals are doing. Number 6 is The Women in the Woods by SQ McGrath. If you've been following the channel this year at all, you might remember me going on and on about this for about 2 months. This is, oh, I love this so much. I think if you're a fan of films like Midsummer, this might appeal to you. It's just so good. So it's about a mother and her son that are sort of backpacking. They take a wrong turn and they end up lost in the woods, and they are not equipped for this. They're supposed to be just going on a little hike, like on a trail. They've gone off road and now they're in the woods, and they're not prepared for camping or trying to navigate themselves out. They don't have wilderness skills, so it's very dire. And then we're also jumping back in time in this mother's life to when she was a teacher and she was dealing with an unusual student that was giving her some jip, and it was just jumping back and forth. And initially I thought, well, why are we jumping back in time to this interaction with this guy? Because obviously everything turned out fine because she's here now. But then the closer towards the end you get, the more you start thinking, wait a minute. And yeah, the author is just a genius at feeding all of these little things in and then wrapping everything up so beautifully at the end. There's no useless scene, no wasted dialogue, no like red herrings either. Like, everything is really well set up, but it's one of those things where you realize at the end that all the clues were there. I did work little bits out, but not the whole thing, and so I got to be plenty surprised. It's really good folk horror. When they're lost in the woods, they come across what can only be described as a little woodland commune of people that initially seem really nice, as they always do, but there's stuff going on. And then the third act really ramps up what you traditionally find in horror, if you know what I mean. So, you know, people who don't read or watch horror think that horror is all blood, guts and gore and nothing else, but you know, it's not. It's story, and it's, I don't know, reflections of the real world. And then yes, there's some blood and guts sometimes, but not in most of the stuff I read. There is some blood in this one, and I really loved it because I wasn't expecting it. It didn't feel like it was going to be that kind of story at all. Not excessive amounts of horrible human suffering, but enough in there to firmly cement this as a really visceral, good horror novel. And yeah, this is the first book I read by SQ McGrath, and I own everything she's released because of this one, so I loved it. Coming in at number 5 is Mantis by Erica Summers. I love Mantis. I love it. It's an apocalyptic story, which is, it's like a biblical apocalyptic story, but it's just nothing you've read before. Our main character, Mantis, is, as the author describes it, aggressively bisexual. Which, like, it's not really a plot point. It's just in there, and I really appreciated seeing a well-formed bisexual character because I never see that. I hardly ever see it, and if I do see it, it usually serves some sort of point for the story, and I'm a little tired of there having to be a justifiable reason for a character to be anything but straight, because someone being straight in a story is never anything to do with the plot, and it never needs to be anything to do with the plot, if you know what I mean. So that was really refreshing. This is a comedy horror story about Mantis, who in the opener, she's taken a girl back to her place. The girl keeps saying she can see something like lurking around in the bathroom, and then when Mantis goes in there, it's a demon, and she just casually slays it. And that was just so funny to me. It's a bit like, oh, this shit again, and she kills it, and then she realizes that the fact this demon is here, it signals something, so she has to reform a band of demon killers who are made up of strippers and a DJ. The DJ is kind of just tagging along, and also there are great personal stakes for one of the dancers, and they basically go on this road trip caper where they have to collect artifacts and, you know, to get them to this end point. All the while the entire world is in jeopardy, and they're all in jeopardy, and we've got this one mother character whose kid is at risk. It was just all of my favourite things rolled into one, and I think that this is the first thing I read by Erica Summers, and it turned me onto all of her work. She's her sense of humour is really smart, and the way that she paced everything and plotted everything in the story, there were things about it that I think I would have got on a reread, but we talked about this when I interviewed her. I will put that actually in the description as well as timestamping all of the books and authors I'm mentioning, where she told me that there are 7 artifacts because of 7 deadly sins and things, like, just really good biblical tie-ins, like good knowledge base of the sort of subgenre she was in without forcing that she'd done any research down your throat kind of thing. I just absolutely love that book, and I love Erica Summers, and she's one of those automatic buy authors for me. By the way, this list was really hard because there were a couple of things that were definitely always going to be in it, a few others that I went through all 58 books that I'd read, looking at all my notes and weighing everything up, but the top 5 in particular were really hard for me to put in any sort of order, just so you know how close everything was to being number 1. Number 4, They Are Cursed Like You by Holley, Cornetto and S.O. Green from Erie River Publishing. Oh, Mantis was published by Rusty Ogre, by the way, I don't know if I said that, and The Women in the Woods is independently published. So They Are Cursed Like You, oh, so refreshing. This is an adult witch story, an adult horror witch novel, and I never get to read those. I always complain that I really love witches, but I want like nasty stuff with my witchcraft. Like, I've got nothing against YA. I do read YA sometimes, and I've got nothing against paranormal romance. It's just not my preferred cup of tea. But usually when you're seeing witches, it's in those genres with those kinds of themes, and I want more just like upfront adult witch fiction, horror fiction, and this really delivered. It wasn't YA at all. It does have some YA characters, but so basically what we've got is an established group of adult witches they're a coven that have been together for a while, and we're in modern day with this. And then we've also got some teen witches that, I say teen witches, teenagers that are just discovering that there might be some magic that exists, and it's set around a trailer park. So there are a lot of themes going on, like really fractured relationships, like young pregnancies, you know, poverty to an extent, and then I think a lot of the appeal of witchcraft in a lot of stories is like wish fulfillment. Like if you just had the power, you could make good things happen for you. So I think that speaks to a lot of people, and the way that these girls even meet these women is really messed up from the get-go, and then it just continues to get messed up. I didn't know where it was going to go. I was not expecting bodies, horrible murders, blood everywhere, people being completely self-serving even though they've been friends for decades. It really like escalated and ramped up all of these elements that you want to see. I really like wholeheartedly recommend it. I think it was just, I read this like right at the start of the year as well, and I still think about it often. Okay, now for number 3, 2, and 1. This is gonna like annoy some people, but I couldn't separate them, so this is a joint number 1, and I've never done this before because I can always find a reason to put something above something else, no matter how small, as I have done with the rest of this list. But these books and authors made this really hard for me, and I do fully plan on making prizes like I have for the last 2 years, but I'm gonna have to think about how to make something nice for the winners of this. All 3 of them. So without further ado, my number 1 favourite horror novel, 2024, and they were all published this year, so these are all new books. Among the Living by Tim Lebbon, Black Sheep by Rachel Harrison, and then obviously All the Fiends of Hell by ADAM NEVILL. Now, let me just tell you a little bit about each book, and then I will try to justify why I couldn't even figure out a number 2 and then a joint number 1 with 2 books. So the first one that I read of these was Among the Living, and this, it's just a horror fan's dream. This is about a group of people who, so we've got some environmentalists, some activists, and then we've got some other people. In the beginning, a group go into this cave that has so far been inaccessible to humans because of it's like set in a really snowy, icy place, and the cave wasn't reachable before, but now because of global warming and things thawing and stuff, now there was entry to this cave. So this group go down there and they find what is essentially described as a tableau of frozen dead people, but then are they dead? Something moves down there, and that image on its own was really, really scary to me. And then the environmentalists catch up to them because they don't want damage being done. Like there's a whole thing, but that's not really important. But they're all together anyway. But it turns out that by opening up this cave, they've unleashed something, and it's bad. It's potentially apocalyptic, and there's kind of a race against time for people to get the hell out of there, and there's an infection, and I would describe this as The Thing meets The Last of Us, and I love both of those things. The Thing is one of my favourites of all time. The Last of Us is amazing. Tim always does really good characters, and I think that one of the things that he does better than most, or better than all, actually, he's my favourite person for this, is how well he uses landscapes and terrains and locations. So the location is never just a backdrop with a Tim Lebbon book, it's like basically a character, and his understanding of like the outdoors is amazing, because as well as what's going on with what's come out of the cave, these people are battling weather, terrain, landscape, all of this stuff, and it's basically a secondary villain or antagonist. It's just a cold horror book. I absolutely loved the ending. I really appreciated the way he went with the ending, and I've just been raving about it all year, and I really, really loved it. And then I believe that the next book I read was All the Fiends of Hell by Adam Nevill. And as you all know, Adam Nevill is just probably my favourite author of all time at this point. I've absolutely loved I've read and loved every single thing he's released, and I think that my Adam Nevill videos are probably the most popular ones on the channel still. This was different for Adam because he normally writes in the folk horror kind of stuff, but this is completely different, although he still managed to capture somehow the atmosphere that he gets when he's writing folk horror. So our protagonist, his name is Carl or Kyle, I can't remember, so I'm just going to call him Kay. Kay is really, really sick one night with a horrible flu, and he's hallucinating that he hears these bells, and he's just seeing all sorts of stuff. And then a couple of days later, when he finally is up and about again, he goes outside and finds that everyone in his neighborhood has disappeared. All their front doors are open. It's as if they just walked out of their houses in the middle of the night and vanished. And he's going a little bit further afield, and the only people he actually encounters are people that are sort of like in some way, so he meets a woman who's bedridden, so she couldn't have wandered out of her house in the middle of the night and things like that. So the disabled, the elderly that would have been kept inside homes, like older people homes or care homes and things like that. So those are the only people who are left, and he encounters a couple of children as well, and then he ends up being sort of a surrogate caretaker for them. And for the longest time I didn't even know what genre this was, because I intentionally avoid back cover synopses. I never read them, but this is marketed as sci-fi horror. I didn't know if this was something coming from a different dimension. I didn't know if it was aliens. I didn't know if it was a biblical apocalypse and everything was coming out of hell, because it could be any of those things. The monsters are absolutely horrible, and just when you think they can't get scarier, he one-ups the monsters again, and the threat level and everything. And it's not just Kay and the kids that we have to worry about. The entire planet, as far as we know, is being subjected to this. I personally think that this is Adam Nevill's best book so far, and since I read it I've thought that, and I haven't changed my mind at all. It's outrageously brilliant, and it's completely different to Tim Lebbon's, even though there's a possible apocalypse going on here as well, but they're just so far removed. This feels cold and wintry. It's perfect seasonal read, actually. This feels hellfire hot. And the sense of doom in both of them is so palpable, and I love it. And as soon as I read this, I was like, oh god, that I already knew that I was really gonna have problems picking between these two for my best book of the year, even though I think I read this in April, so quite early in the year. But I was thinking nothing's gonna compete with these. These are the ones, and I thought, well, I might have to do a joint winner. And then Rachel Harrison just comes along with Black Sheep, which is one of my favourite books I've ever read, and then made it really hard for me. And this is about a young woman who has moved away from home a few years back. She comes from a very religious community. They take their church really seriously. She at some point got disillusioned with the whole thing and didn't really believe in it anymore and didn't really want to be a part of it. But not being a part of the religion also means not being part of the community anymore in this case, so she had to go. And that aspect of it was really interesting just in of itself, and then something happens that gives her cause to have to return home. So I just thought that I was going to get a horror story about an extreme religious community. I wasn't expecting where it went, and I don't want to say I would really prefer for you to go into this blind if you haven't read it, because there are things that were deliciously surprising to me that other people knew because they'd read reviews with certain aspects mentioned. But this, for my personal horror tastes, this ticked every single box. Also, I think that Rachel Harrison might be the best living horror author at the moment for characters, especially female protagonists, female characters. Her character work is unreal. I've never read an author who can so quickly paint a visual of a character. She can do it in a couple of lines. You've never seen a character before, and then a few lines later, after being introduced to them, you've got their whole personality. I don't know how she does this. People should be teaching writing classes with her books as an example. So we had a really solid character to begin with before we even actually get into the, like, you know, the call to action and the adventure stuff. It's, I wish I could tell you more about it, but I just don't want to spoil it. But yeah, so basically I've been going back and forth. I think I read this probably around June. Ooh! I got it in an Abominable Book Club box, and I'd never read Rachel Harrison before. And I just want to say, Rachel, if you see this, Tim's been one of my top 3 authors for at least a decade. I love him. And ADAM NEVILL, in the last 5, maybe 3 or 4 years, came swinging out of the gate, and then I got obsessed with him too. And I think I've probably talked the most about Adam's stuff. But everybody knows how obsessed I am with these 2 authors. So for this to come a joint first with the likes of these guys, for me, for my taste, is like, also this has made me just buy everything that Rachel's written as well. So I also recommend all of it. I recommend all of the works by these people, but yeah, this book was the first Rachel Harrison read, and also the thing that made her an automatic buy for every book she releases now. I pre-order. So yeah, this is my #1 novel, horror novel, 2024. They were all published this year, and I couldn't pick. Tim's is by Titan, Adam's is by Ritual Limited, which is his own publishing company, and Rachel Harrison is it? Oh, this is Titan. Huh, I thought I read it with someone else. Yeah, this is Titan as well. I do love Titan. I gotta say, I'm a big fan. They publish a lot of Paul Tremblay as well, as another favourite. So yeah, so these are my top #1 pick, and I'm really sorry that I can't pick between them because I love them. I love them all. Do you know, I have noticed there's a theme though. All of these are potential apocalypse stories, so I guess that's the thing that joins them. But they're all completely different types of horror, completely different types of possible world-ending scenarios, completely different types of characters. They're so, apart from like the apocalyptic thing, I guess, but they're so chalk and cheesy. Maybe that's why I couldn't pick between them, because they're not even similar, so I couldn't pick the one I preferred. But yeah, I just love them. Tell you what else will cause an apocalypse. If you don't subscribe, I will start using my dark incantations to bring you all down. Subscribe. I hope there are some new things on this list for you to try. I would love to know what your top books are of the year. If you don't have a top 10, I would love to know your top couple of favourites at the very least. I don't need anything else on my TBR, but that doesn't stop me buying more books ever. So I would love to know what your favourites of the year are, especially if they were published this year too. Always on the lookout for new great horror, especially if you have apocalyptic recommendations. That'd be pretty cool. Please.